Gematria seems to be replacing words with numbers. So,
yes.
you see, so what they say is that instead of reading the Bible, you count the Bible.
Oh, yes, a lot of people have done that sort of thing, yes.
Oh, you know that? You're familiar with that?
Well, there was actually a paper in the in Statistical Science, a quite respectable journal, about people doing this in the late 90s.
The argument is that in Hebrew, he didn't have symbols for numbers. They used to write out the numbers in letters. So they then say, OK, so in that way, you then accord a value to each letter of the alphabet. Then you add it all up. You add up all the numbers of a particular phrase. So if, for example...
And thus you prove that Martin Luther adds up to 666, or if you happen to be Martin Luther, you prove that Leo X adds up to 666.
I think I've got Prince Charles here somewhere, you see.
Oh, yes, yes.
Wherever he's gone, he's somewhere here. Now, here he is. Here's Prince Charles. Look, we're coming down. This says Prince Charles of Wales. And then you add up all that, Prince of Wales, all the numbers, and what's it come to?
666,
it
I
is,
expect.
Absolutely, 600.
But has it occurred to you that if that didn't work, then you could have tried missing out the of, or you could have tried Prince Charles of Cornwall? There are so many different, or Rothsay, there are so many different ways of doing this. And
numerology may be nonsense on stilts, but it is still slightly eerie to realise how many mathematicians are prone to apocalyptic pronouncements. It's not just Newton. His great predecessor, John Napier, who invented the logarithm, also mathematically decoded the Book of Revelation. And in the 20th century, another universally respected philosopher and mathematician, Bertrand Russell, found his certain vision of the coming end not in the history of the Bible, but in the logic of nuclear escalation.
I think it's so serious that I consider it very doubtful whether any Briton will be alive 12 months hence.
I've gone deep down into these bunker-like offices of King's College London to meet Peter Neumann, an expert in defence studies.
How many unaccounted for nuclear bombs are there in the world today?
There are dozens of unaccounted nuclear devices from the former Soviet Union, and probably a small number of others from other countries, but the majority certainly comes from the former Soviet Union. The Russians weren't actually that careless. Many of these devices can only be used with a code, and often it is argued that actually terrorists, for example, are owning some of these nuclear devices, but they don't know how to unlock the code or how to actually use them. So it may not actually be that dangerous, even if they have.
It's not very reassuring, though, is it, to think of a group of terrorists sitting around trying codes? What sort of space? What size is it?
Well, they come in all sizes. The Russian famously had suitcase nuclear bombs. They were so-called tactical nuclear devices.
What sort of damage would one of those suitcase bombs do?
Well, those suitcase bombs, it's often been said, are on the scale of the Hiroshima bomb. So they're still quite powerful nuclear devices which can destroy, large urban areas.
How does Neumann, how do the rest of us in Britain stay quite so composed? I mean, even if we overlook the threat of nuclear terrorism, how can we also ignore the growing evidence that we now have leaders with not only the power to destroy the world, but with an apparent religious justification for doing so?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Bruce Lincoln, who's a professor of the history of religion at Chicago University, has carried out an analysis of the favoured aggressive words used by President Bush and found clear matches with the language of Isaiah, Job, and, yep, the Book of Revelation. But there's no need for such line-by-line analysis of the speeches made by Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran. Islam's account of the end of the world comes from the Quran and from other Islamic traditions, and it's close to the Christian story, but Christ plays second fiddle in it to the Mahdi, or the 12th Imam, the direct descendant of the Prophet, in the great battle against the Antichrist. And as in Christianity, that ushers in the Last Judgment and heaven and hell. President Ahmadinejad believes in the imminent return of the Mahdi. It's a frightening scenario. Two powerful world leaders in conflict with each other, who both believe in a religious apocalypse. Ahmadinejad reminds us that alongside the apocalyptic Christians in this country, we've also become dramatically aware of another large group of people who take their holy book literally. That's why I decided to meet with Taji Mustafa from Hizb ut-Tahrir, a group regularly described as Islamic fundamentalist.
In Islam, there's a notion of the end of the world.
There is the concept of that the world will end, there will come a time when the world will end, and there are some prophecies that do talk about...
Yes, you have signs, don't you? You have the minor signs and the major signs.
That's right. Some of them, one can obviously look around us and you can see. So when it talks about the spread of immorality, you know, it will become very open. People can point to things around us.
The decline of family, as you were saying.
Decline of family, etc. And the thing is, these signs are not dated.
No.
They're not. It's not said this will occur in this year. Nobody
signs
really knows.
And the returns, and these are definite.
If they're in authentic narrations of the Prophet, yes, they are definite, and every Muslim believes in them.
And what about the arrival of the Mahdi, the apocalyptic descendant of the Prophet?
In his reign, in his time, as the ruler of the Muslims, Jesus will return in that time.
Would true Muslims be required to regularly pray for the arrival of the Mahdi?
We pray for the triumph of good over evil. We pray for that the world will become a better place.
Of course, if you know the world's coming to an end, you can either lie back and think of heaven, or make the pathway to that end a little smoother. Here in Britain, in the tidy terrace streets of West London, members of the Aetherius Society recognise that the world is heading towards disaster, but also believe that such a disaster can be smoothed, as it has been in the past, by spiritual action, by interceding with the cosmic masters, our spiritual elders from other worlds.
What we're really saying is that the big deficiency in the world is spiritual, let's use that word rather than religious, spiritual energy. And there's a lack of it. And if we can get enough spiritual energy out through whatever means, be it prayer, be it mantra, be it service to humanity, that will solve the world's problems. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. In Operation Prayer Power, we store the energy in a container. And the reason for that is that you can have hundreds, thousands even, of man or woman hours of prayer stored, and then when a crisis occurs, for example, the tsunami, we are able to respond. We actually responded quicker to that, as far as I know, than the government.
The Aetherius Society was founded in 1955 by Dr. George King, a former taxi driver, who found he had the ability to communicate with beings from other planets.
You see, I had quite an amazing experience one Saturday morning while I was washing up some dishes. I had a voice, quite definitely a voice out of this world, say to me, "Prepare yourself, you are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament."
He provided a way for us to cooperate with beings from other worlds to help save the planet.
Mr. King has explained to me that, in fact, it may take him 30 seconds, even perhaps as much as a minute, to get into a trance.
So, I mean, he's extremely unusual, and I'll stick my neck out and say I actually believe he came from another planet, although he never went out and claimed that.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My dear friend.
Your name is?
I am known as Aetherius.
But I don't believe there'll be another contact like him in the future, because in the future we'll have this great landing of this master in a UFO openly.
The Aetherius Society believes we are coming ever closer to the end of this world, to a time when the cosmic masters will visit us in person and when a new age will begin. And Operation Prayer Power is a way to soften the transition to the end of the world as we know it.
But ultimately, when I talk about end time, though, I'm not even just referring to this planet. I'm referring to end time of the universe. That's what I was referring to just now.
The universe. That's right.
Ultimately, all.
I mean, this is just terror. This is just one
exactly.
place. One
terror
place.
with an A. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
But, I mean, I don't know whether you've looked into the whole idea of the age of Aquarius, whether you've done an astrological look at this.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
No.
The age of Aquarius begins, and it's debated among astrologers, but around about now. The whole idea of the Aetherius Society is to try and make this transition as smooth as possible. We're actively engaged in doing that on a day-to-day basis. We're a commando
But you're slowing
force.
it down, I read somewhere.
Well, you know, in some ways, this coming of this next master, much as I think it would be marvellous if he came today, may not be good for everybody, particularly if they fight it, resist it, or try to shoot it. I mean, there have been, American jets have fired or attempted to fire missiles at UFOs, and that's CIA papers. That's not me making it up. So obviously they will pick their time, and for some people, the more time that they have to change, to adapt, the better.